early years trying very hard to please elders and to kind of like, I don't want to say I was not in the shadows. I was not that type, but it took me several years to speak my mind in ways of, let's say, my own empowerment. I'm very glad, and it only came through challenges. So even that was a good thing for me, Rocky.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Maura Sweeney, who's back again to share how to be happy. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. This week's quote is from Alana Hunt. It's only when you take responsibility for your life that you discover how powerful you truly are. It's so true. We can do so much more than we sometimes believe we can. Of course, there's a price to pay. You have to decide if it's worth it for you. You also need to ensure you're in alignment with what you can truly do. For example, if I'm 50 years old and 5 feet 6 inches, trying to be a starter for the NBA, probably not going to work out because it's not in alignment with what's needed. Sure, you can still play basketball, or you could even work for the team. But being a starter is probably not it. We're going to chat about this and how to adapt in an ever-changing world. The reality is the truth is too often hidden and a lot of propaganda is out there. This is not conspiracy theory. It's just who's following who and who is making the money and what are their agendas. Maura Sweeney's back again. She was on before COVID in episode 98 as the ambassador of happiness. Today, we'll dig more into why people struggle and what you can do about it. Maura is a world traveler and pioneer in the happiness movement. She's addressed audiences in 15 countries across the United States and on her personal leadership, influence, and power of happiness in the workplace. She's a former co-host of the Tampa Bay, Florida State of Happiness radio show and several-year columnist for HuffPost. She is a natural unifier and uplifter, pointing others towards a happier state of mind. First given the name Ambassador of Happiness by the UNESCO Center for Peace when invited to speak at the inaugural Nelson Mandela Day celebrations. She's since delivered engaging presentations with an unexpected punch that challenges audiences to see their lives in brighter and unexpected ways. Let's meet Maura. Welcome to Richer Soul, Maura Sweeney. It's great to have you back again.
Rocky, it's so great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You are most welcome. So catch us up. It's been a long time since you were last on, and we had a little bit of a pandemic in the middle.
You know, isn't that true? It almost feels like last time we spoke was a lifetime ago. I've described the pandemic period of time like Twilight Zone. I could remember leaving a place and coming back to it. It was somebody's name I couldn't remember. And they said, "Oh, Maura, no worries. That was before COVID. And this is post COVID." It was like a lifetime ago. So I feel not only have I pivoted again, I don't want to say pivoted in a big way, but I think I've moved along in the times, added different experiences that I would have never had since we not had COVID, such as staying behind for somebody like me who enjoys traveling and being out in other nations, and suddenly finding out that I think the last speaking engagement I had was in London 2 weeks or a few days prior to the shutting down of international travel and before everything was being done on Zoom. I thought, oh my gosh, it was like shutting off the world to me, because I literally thrive being in the company of other people physically. And yet, this is what I was mentioning to you before we went live today, is that I got a phone call during COVID from our local elections office here in Pinellas County, Florida, which I did not realize is one of the major bellwethers. At one point, they were considering it the bellwether county in the entire country. They had so many people leaving due to COVID, and they needed some essential workers. And I'll tell you, it was almost like if God could have tapped me on the back for the perfect interim type experience when I couldn't go anywhere. And for someone like me, Rocky, I am so much for everyone. It's just the way I was designed. I know I have certain ways I think, but really I am for everyone. Being in the middle of that office and hiring and recruiting and making sure all of the workers who were going to be working in elections were properly trained and positioned, it gave me access not only to local people that lived here in the west coast of Florida, but because of where we live, it was people who came here from all over the country, some from different countries, the young, the old, the rich, the poor, the uneducated to the super educated, the retired intelligence officials and, CEOs, and the ordinary people that were bus drivers. And for me, during that time period, to watch, as I always have, probably since, I can tell you this, and I know I'm dating myself, but I was in kindergarten when JFK was assassinated. And I've had my mind and my thoughts on things like Washington and policy ever since I learned not only that JFK, who to me was just a wonderful leader, which is one of the things I speak about, but when I saw the face of LBJ as our new president, and I was only in kindergarten, and I thought, something very bad just happened. I don't know what it was, but something very bad just happened. So for me to be here during the time of the last presidential election, and in fact, this past year, I was brought in for a 2-day assignment. They needed some of my skill sets, what I thought was 2 days. Then it was 2 weeks. Well, it turns out I was 10 months working at the elections office on this assignment. And I thought, how fascinating that I feel like, even though I wasn't going places as I had in the past, that all of the world, and let's say the tempo, the tenor, and the feel of where people were living mentally, emotionally, psychologically, economically, their fears, it was all coming in through the elections office. So that's where I've been. And yet that too is now behind me. And as much as I have been doing my speaking, I expect even yet a lot more in this coming year, where travel is open and people are willing to visit with each other in person as opposed to just online. Because I've done several Zoom meetings with people, but I'll tell you, if I'm going to be speaking about your personal leadership, your sense of identity, your influence and the power of happiness in your life and at work and your culture, I get my energy from being face to face with 3D people. Does that bring up to date?
It does. And the world has, I would say, essentially opened back up. At least the United States has, in the sense that people are going back to in-person conferences. That is more so the expectation. And even though they're going back, people seem to be going to different places. Like there's a new normal, right? Maybe they're picking new conferences or doing things differently. or they're being more intentional because you got out of the rhythm of what life was. Now you have to create a new rhythm for what life will be.
Exactly. Exactly. Because that's one of my new things coming up that I'll be introducing this year as a new presentation. But I know it'll take shape as the next few months move on. And it's yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I think a lot of people lived by whatever the norms were. And as we all know, a lot of the old norms are not working, haven't been working. And we're at a time of incredible shift. But my whole desire is to give people some of those, let's say, reminders that they have within them the capacity to evaluate, to choose what resonates, what harmonizes with their value system, with what's important to them. And as you said, to be a little bit more mindful and to be able to bring together people's professional aspirations with what's important to them at home, with relationships, with what their lives and their families and their community to look like, and basically to empower people. So, yeah, you're right. A lot of things have changed. But the thing that amazed me is how many adults that I used to think all made their own decisions lost themselves during COVID. They became such creatures of fear. And we're going to have to get to this place where certain people, especially after all the disclosures come out, I mean, across the board with so many things, people are going to have to get to this place where they think, okay, I'm not just going to take so-and-so's word for something. I'm not just going to listen to what the experts say. Do I have the ability to read through things and to dissect and to look and to listen to various perspectives so that I could get the whole panorama and then decide what's legitimate, what's real, and what resonates with me? So it all sort of works together.
I think that's harder than ever. I was just reading this morning and they're talking about if you dissent against the line, you are essentially silenced. And that's happening in science, in medicine, in education, everywhere.
You know, we're looking at each other face to face on a Zoom call, and I know your viewers are only going to hear us. That has so much become what America and the West, even maybe more the West, but we had become that. In fact, what was happening, and I think most people didn't see it, was that the ability to have a difference of opinion or a variety of perspectives was suddenly being shut out or progressively being closed out to the point where if you did not hold fast to whatever was the prevalent opinion or thought, you were not welcome into the conversation, which to me is a very foreign thing. I like bringing everybody to the table, say, all right, we're dealing with a problem. I want to hear from everybody. What are your perspectives and where are we going to go on this? But what I'm seeing now, Rocky, as a result of being one of those observers for I want to tell you, like a half a century, is that we got so locked down with information in, oddly enough, an era where you would think we had access to so much that now things are going in the opposite direction. And many things that we could not hear from before, we are now hearing. I go to a lot of different events, especially now the places have opened up. And I watch very closely, and sometimes I'm the person in the audience that may make an inquiry or ask a question that gets people to think beyond where they've been. Never imagine that our country and Western news media would have gotten to the level of control that we did. It was so shocking to me that when I was an undergrad, one of my majors was political science. And at the time, we used to make fun of, I shouldn't say make fun of, but let's say we felt sorry for the people in the old Soviet Union because they had Pravda. And Pravda had one way of looking at things. It was the state-owned news agency. And I thought, we've become almost more closed down than Pravda was several decades ago. But that, I will tell you, from all that I watch and observe, and I mean, I do this, I don't want to say 24 hours a day, but I'm one of those people, I could wake up 2 a.m. and I'm busy finding out what's going on around the world. And I've got so many people that I know and I can inquire with that things that were kept from us are now coming to the forefront. So it's science, technology, I would say contractual agreements, corruption, things in the banking community. There are just many, many things that were probably tamped down on so much that we're getting the opposite, or let's say a boomerang effect. And that's what I'm anticipating to happen ever more abundantly in 2023. And you could see what that could do to people who grow, especially out of fear, to trust in what they've been told, and then suddenly to find out that maybe not everything I've been told is the truth, and maybe not all the things I was told that are supposedly good for me are actually for my benefit. And that's a shock. That's a shock to the psyche. It could be very upsetting to people. But, my role has always been one who is there to uplift and unite and empower. And I think I use a lot of my past for doing that. Somehow I think I was prepared for this era.
So how do people figure out what is true versus what's propaganda?
Well, one of the ways you could find out is if you ask a question or offer up some information that's not part of the prevailing narrative or story. When you find out that it's unwelcome, usually that's a sign of fear to me. I've always been this way. Now, maybe somebody listening would remember this, but I grew up as a young child in the Catholic faith. I did not know as a young girl years ago, you don't ask questions about your faith. You're just told what it is. And I was not one of those people. So I was a natural inquiring personality. If something didn't make sense and I would ask questions, it was always very revealing to me. Not even so much in the answer as it would be in the response to the question I asked. So if you would want to repose that question to me, let me see if I can answer it a little bit better.
So how do we know what's true? How can we discern what's really the truth?
I think a very good starting point is to find people around us who are interested in the truth. Sometimes we like the truth. Sometimes it's great news. Sometimes we don't like the truth. But to be around people who have an interest in getting to the truth or finding out those things that make sense, especially in light of an impasse somewhere where we're given one story or one narrative, and then it's butting up against a lot of information that is just confronting it. It's very telling to find yourself in an environment either with those who say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense to me either. Let's go interview. Let's ask some more people. Let's bring more people to the table. Let's find out why certain people feel the way they do. And I will tell you from what I've noticed, when you find people on opposing ends, and that's really what not only America has become. They were thinking it was only us. It was happening all throughout Western Europe. The divisions were so stark, and it was all designed to, I would say, to pit people against one another rather than allowing people to work collectively and cooperatively to move forward. And it's a fear tactic. And I think it's been used during wars, during revolutions. But that's really what it is. It's to find people, and they may not be at all like you, but people who are interested in the truth. And what exactly does that mean? I would say when people are afraid to ask a question, or will tell you, oh, we're not going to look there, or will slam something down before delving into it to say, oh, are there any merits to this? And if so, should I know about them? That in itself, to me, would be a little bit of a red flag to say, oh, this person's either fearful, and a lot of people are. I mean, you could look at certain industries where people know not to go against the grain. I could tell you, I've got friends who are in the field of academia. Academia was always a place you could go to. You could talk about anything. You could learn about anything. And then suddenly it became very politicized. I've got friends in the healthcare industry. A few of them who have left because they said the politics, and I don't mean right-left politics, but literally the internal politics of what was right for the patient versus the institution were coming into play. You could find it in there's so many industries, but how do we find out? I think it's person to person, conversation to conversation, and a willingness to say, you know what, I don't even care if I'm right or wrong. It doesn't matter. I would just like to open up the windows and the doors and get other people's perspectives and put them against one another, and let's see what has value, what has merit, because I always feel this way. The truth never minds being inquired into. And there's usually a sense of liberty when there's truth. But if there's not liberty, and if there's a tamping down on inquiry or additional information, then that to me is something like, the people here, they're maybe in a vulnerable position. Maybe some people are being controlled and maybe some people want to control you. So I'd say a lot of it goes with the internal sense that you get when you're in certain environments.
We always said follow the money because that'll tell you what the behaviors are. And again, I don't think people realize, we're talking about medicine. People don't realize, and we've done shows on this just recently to talk about all of the influences that are going on behind the scenes. And again, they're all money driven. I mean, that's what it essentially comes down to, why you're not told certain things and how each of the different players has their own game that they're, so to speak, playing. The insurance company, the health system, the this, the that. I think step one is awareness. And then step two is being okay to challenge it. What I have found, though, is so many people, it's not even that they're unwilling to challenge. They're so positive to a side that they can't hear anything.
That's an interesting one. Or there's such advocates for a side.
But they're not even in it. That's what I don't understand. I'm like, okay, you don't technically have skin in this game. Why are you such an advocate, or why are you so unwilling to listen?
I have one theory. I don't know if it's right or not. And this is, but I keep coming back to it. We used to have news back in the day. This is even prior to the internet. And even when the internet was out, all of America, let's just keep it with America, but you could talk about other countries as well. But America, I think, is a good place to start. All of America would watch the same news stations every night because it was news, and the Federal Communications Commission treated it a certain way. But then news became replaced with more entertainment-driven programs, more personality-driven programs. But then beyond that, it was further divided into demographics. And I think this is what you're saying. Certain people, they don't even have skin in the game. They may have no real knowledge or direct knowledge of what's going on, but they somehow know, based on whoever or whatever they were tuning themselves into for the news or the interpretation of the news, that you would automatically know when you spoke with somebody, oh, they're part of this camp, or oh, they're part of that camp. They didn't even know why. And one of the things I always try to do, because I'm going to tell you, there's people all over the place, I think, that have come out of that whole system. But I try very diligently to avoid trigger terms, trigger words, because people got so ingrained with conversational words, but also imagery, and it would set them off at a visceral level. And so either they were absolutely pro for something, which at points could be ridiculous, or absolutely against something else. And what it did is it turned people into one-dimensionals instead of multifaceted people that could look at a system or look at a situation around the horn and say, let me look at a number of facets here. We really, with all the education, with all the supposed information that we had available to us, we ended up with a class of people across our nation that was less able to discern, discriminate, and to think on their own than ever before, because a lot of it was being driven by emotions and connections to who they felt they were aligning with, and sometimes the color of their skin, their sexual orientation. There's so many different ways, and I try to cut through it because I think people are going to be, mark my words, this year, people are going to realize they were fighting against their own neighbors for no good reason.
I think a lot of people are afraid to even speak up, and that's what I hear is
yes.
We don't even want to get involved in the conversation because it just isn't worth the energy. And so a lot of people have just gone quiet.
Very true. And I know a lot of them as well. It's funny. I know the people that like to tell you everything they think, as well as those who are not, I would say, not argumentative, not strivers. They don't need to be right. And they just kind of sit back. You know what's unfortunate about that, though, Rocky, is that I think for a time, and I'm going to say this is people on both sides, if you want to call that the political spectrum, many of them feel disenfranchised. They feel like there is no justice. They feel like the system works for the other party and against them, but both sides feel that way. And it is such an unfortunate state of affairs because our nation, our people, our health, our welfare, our future communities, and the things we build all depend upon hope. And the system over the past few years had declined to this place where so many people across America felt disconnected, very vulnerable, fearful of their neighbors, and sense that they did not have proper representation. And it worked on both sides, really both sides. That's a discouraging thing. When that happens to people, they can discontinue being builders, visionaries, creatives, risk takers. They end up trying to protect themselves rather than expand themselves. And we need to have people, older people, middle-aged people, younger people, looking to grow, to expand, and to literally add life to their life and the lives of those around them. And we were in the opposite. We were in that self-protection mode of, we have this terrible thing that's going to kill us all. Everybody's afraid of everybody else, right? Isn't it so true? And it literally undermined the soul. Now, we're talking here about richer soul, but it undermined the soul and the life of America. But I really do this year, I expect a lot of additional disclosures to come out. It's going to be shocking to people across the board. But the outcome, I believe, is that people are going to be like awakened to say, hey, wait a minute. If this happens again, my light's going to be on. I'm going to be paying attention. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to put myself in the ring rather than sitting back out of fear or letting the so-called experts handle it. Because you're right. When you even say follow the money, I think there was a lot of money that was used and abused and then used to control people.
So what do we do differently?
One of the things I've always recommended, and I've done this my whole life because I think I was always something of an independent thinker. I was never part of anyone's group growing up. You couldn't put me in anybody's silo, is to make sure before getting out of bed in the morning or before, let's say, going out the door or getting started with your day, and then again before you go to sleep at night, spending a few quiet minutes by yourself. Listening, now this may sound strange, but not to you. Listening to your own soul speak to you. I want to tell you this as an analogy. I probably mentioned last time that we only have one child, and I had homeschooled her for several years. And you could tell she's got a very loquacious mother. she was very, very bright girl. She started college at 13, very purposed. But she was very quiet in the midst of conversation. I would take her with me everywhere we went, and I'd be doing a lot of talking and asking questions. We would get back in the car or get back home, and this seemingly quiet young girl would mention something to me. She could have been 8 or 9 or 12. And I used to think, oh my gosh, Kaylee, how did you see that in so and so? How did you notice that? And she did it because she was so mindful. She managed to not get caught up in a lot of the energies of other people, but she would learn to be a very good listener and an observer. So this is where I go back. And even though I am quite loquacious, I'm generally a quiet person. I like to take time every morning to get close to my own thoughts, my own peace, the things that are meaningful and important to me and where I want to go. I did this for a decade in corporate leadership, and it was important to me to make sure I could uphold the overall culture of where we were and where we were going and let's say the energies. But if we're willing to do that at the beginning of the day, let's say center ourselves, find our anchor, decide, what is that thing we're going to live by? What is that general value that's important to us? And then we go out with it. Then we're not always being bombarded by other people, events, news reports, or things that are supposed to trigger us and put us into fear. And I would say at the end of the day, take a few minutes and just think, how did my day go? Who was I with? And who are those people that I felt the best around? What was I doing? What were we talking about? What was I working on? Where did I feel most creative, most free? Who were those people that get who I am and I get who they are? And when we're together, there's such great energy that goes back and forth. And I would say, in contrast, where were some of the places I was where I knew I was on a completely different wavelength, where my desires and my goals were just not coming into alignment with some of these other people? And how can I adjust myself moving forward to be where I'm in more peace, more harmony? And I always think about this, what's your inside life doing, and thinking about what are your values and how can your outer life reflect that? How do you do things that you agree with the right people, with the right business agreements, with the right modeling? And when you have those two working together, the energies work so well. And so does the positive outcome. So that's where I would go, early morning, late at night, so that you can sort of put the day on hold and look at it more as the interested observer. And someone who says, the center point of influence and the center point of my future is right here and right now where I live. My heart, my energies, my emotions. How can I, little by little, move myself away from certain activities, people, engagements that are not adding to my life or where I want to go? And how do I alternatively pivot and maybe spend a little bit more of my time, my life, my energies with the right kinds of connections, people, creative outlets, business, I don't even want to say business partnerships that feel right. Not just that they look good on paper, but they feel right. One of the biggest things I always tell people with lead, because I love talking about leadership and self-leadership, a wise leader will always look ahead. Many people will do what sounds really good now. What can I get away with? What's a fast buck to make? And they don't think, okay, if I were to look at my future self a year from now, 2 years, 5 years, and what I'm doing, what I'm deciding today has a chance to make it into the public eye, am I going to feel as good about myself? Am I going to feel as proud about myself? Is what I'm doing today going to have a lasting value in what's to come? If it isn't, then I better think twice. And I'll give you my D for lead, LEAD. The D is always to be destiny minded. And I think that this is where, whether we're in business or we're visionaries, whatever it may be, if we could be destiny minded, we want to know wherever we've planted our feet, whatever people we've invested our time in, wherever we've put our energy, that we have something to offer and to bring into the world when we leave that space. And it could be like when I left my corporate career, it doesn't matter. Or when I leave a stage after I've gotten finished speaking, have I left something behind where people have something of value, that they change the way they think, that they see things better, that they are the beneficiary of something I said or did or built and left behind. And I think that goes right into the mindfulness. I think it adds so much credibility, integrity, positive energy, and a sense of hope and good building for our future, not just for an individual, but for a lot of people. And what a great way to look at this year and where people are moving to say, can I look to be a good influence on what's to come? It's not very easy to complain, but can I be a good influence on where I am and what's to come?
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. I find people don't spend enough time thinking about themselves or their destiny or the price they have to pay for what they want.
And I would agree with you. I can tell you, when I was in third grade or second grade, I read every single biography in the fifth grade classroom. I was so inspired by other people's stories that made a difference, that built new things, that changed history. And every single one of those people, we don't see them anymore. We don't see those same biographies. They were all builders, but every single one of them had things to overcome. And it was in the overcoming of those challenges that you see the growth in an individual, the character develop. And for me, that was wonderful. So those were my early inspirations for being mindful. The second part you said, now I'm trying to think of what it was. You said they don't take enough time. I think it's because everybody is preoccupied and they just pick up the latest, newest thing. But who's the loser in that? I mean, imagine this. You have a certain amount of time on this earth and, maybe you have your 20 good years, but then, at some point you're going to be going on the other side of the arc. What are you going to leave behind and how are you going to feel about the life you led, the lives you touched, the improvements you made, the decisions that weren't always based on money, but really have left behind something that speaks of greatness? You mentioned money. There are a couple of interesting things. I just read a quote before we got online. And so much of our society, I want to say it was post-World War II, was really centered around how much could I acquire? How much more can I build? How big of a house can I have? And yet those kinds of things, if they are not looked at properly, can end up causing the people that may appear to the outsiders being very successful to actually be something of a slave of their own making. Being a slave to, I've got this group of people that I run with, and maybe they're going to think a little bit less of me if I decide I don't want to work 80 hours a week, or I want to scale back and do something that's a little bit more meaningful. And not to say any of it's wrong. I applaud people that in the past built the railroads. You know what I'm saying? They came up with new technology so people like you and I and everybody who's listening today can have access to ideas around the world anytime they want in a moment. But there's also a place for other values that also matter to the soul. And I think you could put money over people, or you could also say, do we have a place for people? And do we also value the lives and the richness of life that we wish to not only enjoy, but also model for other people, so that we're not just these very superficial type individuals? Because there's a lot of people I've met, they end up realizing they did a lot of things by making rash decisions or doing things because they thought it was the thing to do. And then later on thought, I've ruined myself because either I hate my job and I drink myself into oblivion every night. You know how it goes, right?
So how do you wake people up before usually when people ask the question, and it always comes around to, you have to wait for people to hit bottom before they'll change. And I'd rather people not hit bottom before they change. I'd rather they change when they need to change. So how do we get people to do that? To look ahead and say, wait a minute, I'm going to challenge everything and I am going to change.
Rocky, I think that's an age-old question. I think I was always one of those people, either born too soon or so much at the front end of things. I would be making moves that other people would look at like, why would you do that? This looks extremely successful. Why did you step away from it? Or why did you step down? But something always on the inside of me had me moving, answering to something different. Now, what I will tell you, and tell me if you've noticed this, that there are challenges in life that cause people to make new choices that they didn't make before. And I will say, case in point, we live in what I've sometimes referred to as another country. Florida was a place that never really experienced COVID to the degree that some other states did. Now, I come from New Jersey. My husband's from Trenton, New Jersey, originally, right outside of Pennsylvania. We'd gone during COVID up that way, and literally traveling several states away, it felt like we were in two different places. What I noticed is that there were some people who, for any one of a number of reasons, could no longer comply with things they were being told to do. So it meant that they did have to say no, that they lost their jobs. So in some cases, trials, challenges forced people into making some tough choices, but then also saying, you know what, had I not been in a challenging space, I might not have gotten to a position to really choose for things that really are more important to me than what I was willing to put up with before. So that's not really an answer, but I think that everybody has their place in life where it's a jumping off space. And it's funny, I've seen a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds, and a number of them said, you know what, I would have never thought that COVID would have changed me the way it did. It sort of opened my eyes to certain things, told me what was more important. And I think surprises in life, challenges in life, they could work both ways. And some of us start the ball rolling ahead of the game, and other people wait until kind of like the rubber hits the road. And other people sometimes find themselves just reacting. But isn't that what they say? There was somebody wrote a very, I don't know, it wasn't Vaynerchuk. Who was it? It was all about the people that are out of the gate first. And then you have like the first early adopters. What was that? We learned that like 10 years ago. What was that
Was
called?
that Seth Godin?
That's who it was.
Yeah.
And you get these people, there might only be a few of them, but they see something new on the horizon. They're not always moved by having to be part of the pack. And they move out ahead, and people may think, hey, these people are a little crazy. But they have an idea, and then the idea starts to pick up, and then you get those early adopters. And then you get something that almost becomes quite normative, and then you get everybody thinks that's the new normal, let me go along with it. It may just be a part of the human psyche. All I know is that I was just made a little bit differently. And, it's just the way I am. I kind of like it.
As do I. And maybe that's what it is just letting go. And going, you know what? I can't control all of that. So just let it be. And I'll tell people, hey, there is a better way. But if they don't want to listen, oh, well, don't listen. Keep going the way you're going and wonder why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. I find a lot of people don't want to know the truth.
Do you know when you just said the word letting go, and you could see what my face was doing? I had those two exact words yesterday. I was going to do a quick YouTube video, and it was for the new year. And that was the message. Are we willing? What would the world be like? Everybody always waits for the world to change so things get better. My feeling has always been, I'm going to change because the way in which I perceive myself in the world, my outlook, changes everything for me. And my question was, and oddly enough, I never got a chance to put it out. What would the world look like if we all let go of all the things we are angry about, all the things we feel like victims of, all of the things we're angry about, all the ancestors we had that did things the wrong way? What would the world be like if we just let it go? So imagine it's a new year. And rather than hoping something's going to happen that will make my life better, or something out there, I'm going to get some news that somebody's going to give me that changes everything around and makes me happy, that we instead let go. You know, I almost imagine letting go of so many things that have defined us, that have limited us, that we use to limit ourselves. The letting go, and I don't know why I thought about this, is regrets. Everything we don't like about ourselves, everything we don't like about other people, everything we've held against others or held against the system, and we literally let it go. Can you imagine if that's the mindset going into a new year? Not only what you will, let's say, emanate from your own body, your aura, what kinds of a message you'll be giving to those around you, but also what people will feel like in your company. Can you imagine a world that just lets so much of the old world, and let's say even old mistakes, go? What kind of a new energy would we all be operating in? It would be really remarkable, and we would undo so much of the negativity, the need to be vindicated, the need to be right, the need even to have our egos protected. Imagine the world if we would let go. And that was my thought for the new year. Can I offer one other thing that's just hitting me now? When you're talking about like people, they always do things that they're told. This is another big, I talked about this probably 10 years ago. And I want to say about education. Now, you heard me reference, and I know probably on our previous podcast, I might have talked about being a homeschooling parent. And at the time, I thought, oh my gosh, I have one child. This is the most anti-social thing I ever thought of in my life. But because we traveled a lot, we had our own business, my husband and I. My husband said, Maura, just do it for a year. And our daughter just loved it. And I found alternate ways for her to get out there. And she ended up going through high school and college at a local college. She got her first 2 years done. Then she went up to Boston for a 4-year degree. Then she got a master's at Harvard. And you know, the interesting thing that I would say, because I know a lot of my daughter's friends as well, is that how many people were told in the past how getting an education and a good education, and let's say from the right institutions, would guarantee you success in life, that you'd be, you know, just moved right into those top level, top paying positions, that you'd have just this wonderful life. It is no longer that way. The cost of education has skyrocketed. And there are so many people that are working under an old model of, if I get, it's not just the bachelor's, it's not just the master's, it's, you know, it's the MBA, it's the law degree, it's, you know, it's a combination MD plus a JD. It's you know it, and all these extra certificates. And all this paying into a system that we were all told was so necessary for our success does not deliver what it used to years ago. On top of which, we don't have all the jobs or the same jobs we used to have. And the cost of an education in relation to people's income is not what it used to be. So now you've got young people, you've got the millennial class that paid into a system that they were told years ago was going to give them a good future. And now what they're finding out is that they can't even afford to buy a place to live because they're too busy paying student loans or repaying student loans. That's an example. You're saying, why won't people let it go? Or what's it going to take for people to change? I could remember one of the very first podcasts I was ever on. I ended up talking about this. And it was even a comment my daughter made because she was one of the first people that ever said to me, do you know, Mom, a lot of these top universities are now offering free classes online. She said, you don't necessarily get the credit for it, but it's the same class. And something in that from my daughter, I thought, you know what? She's speaking about what we're going to get into. And you get the people who are at the back end doing everything they were told by the so-called experts, suffering the most. It's like the last person that puts their money into the darling stock that they heard only did beautiful things, only to find out they bought at the top of the market and everything falls. And that's why I said at the beginning of this interview, I've always been something of an observer of human nature. I look at what goes on in government, politics, culture, the job market, all these things. And my idea is always, what good things can we take from the past? What good things do we have for today? And how do we individually put it into something that has meaning, purpose, and our idea of success for where we want to go and what we want to build on? And I think individually we can start building for a new future.
I agree. So my son is about to graduate from a state school, and he complains to me all the time. And he's like, they don't teach me what I needed to know here. The classes or whatever. I'm like, I get all of that, but you got out in 3 years. You're competing against the kids who went to the Ivy Leagues, who are going for advanced degrees, and you beat them out. So he's like, but I could have learned more at those schools. And I'm like, yeah, but you wouldn't have learned how to learn. Because he's like, they didn't teach me, so I had to figure it out for myself. I'm like, do you not understand that's the skill? Like, that is truly what it is. And that's why you're beating these other people out for these positions. So, and we go back and forth. I'm like, well, if you went there, the differential in cost would have probably been over $200,000 in difference, which is, even because I said, well, he's like, well, I got enough of a job that I could pay that. And I go, yes, you could, but don't forget, half your money's going to taxes first. So it would take you a while to dig yourself out of that hole. And at the end of the day, you wouldn't be any further along. So don't play that game. Kind of taking a step back for a couple of things just because you mentioned them. I think, looking at cryptocurrency today, everyone was told, oh, you don't understand. This is the future. This is the inflation hedge. This is this. And yet now most of them are imploding. And there was a lot of Ponzi and fraud. And going back to politics, this company, is it FTX or whatever, number 2 donor to one of the political parties.
Yes.
And now the bankruptcies judges are saying all those politicians got to give the money back because it was done fraudulently. So they're going to go after that. It'll be interesting to watch and see how that goes. It's funny, though, because when you first started, it brought me back to a stoic thought, which is somebody comes down the street and asks for $100. You're not going to give it to them, are you? Probably not. But somebody comes down the street and says something and they take up residence in your mind and you give it away without thinking. We do that all day on TikTok and Facebook and the political news. And everything else. We just hand our mind away much too carelessly versus what we would do with our wallet. We don't think twice about, why am I letting that thought enter my mind?
You're right. People do not think. I don't know why I feel like I need to mention this. I told you our daughter went to a local college when she hit. Well, she wasn't even a high school age at the time, but she got her high school and first 2 years of college done. When it was time for her to go get an advanced degree, she ended up at Harvard. This is what she told me. Maybe somebody could get something out of this. She said, "Mom, there are programs at Harvard." She said, "You could get your master's degree," and she's got one. She said, "You pay a fraction of the price for the program." And she said, "On your resume, you put a comma rather than a dash after your degree." I said, "You're kidding me." It's true. So I look at my daughter, and even though she had certain opportunities growing up, she's very resourceful. She'll figure things out on her own, which is how she figured out even the whole thing to get through, early college and all that. Your son, I have seen people, and I remember this even like 30 years ago when I was in corporate jobs, and they would say, only hire these people or only these people. I would always pick the person who had people skills, energy, interest, passion, and they may not have had the best background. Plus, before that, I was even an executive recruiter. I would always go for the people that were scrappy, that wanted to figure something out, that had been through tough times before, because I knew those very same people had what they needed in them to create their own success. And I find that now more than ever. I told you when we got up today, and I'm preparing this thing yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It was just an interesting throwback. When I was growing up, if I had a tough time in school, and I did, there were a couple of bullies, and I'd come home and, it'd say, "Oh, so-and-so is calling me names." And everybody used to learn, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So I went from that kind of an upbringing. Not to say that I was brought up on the streets, hardly. But the thing is, you figure it out. You learn how to get along with people. So I grew up from sticks and stones. Well, can hurt my bones, but your names will never hurt me, all the way to the current era that has been by our society, when I use the word inculcated upon a whole new generation of safe spaces and microaggressions, where somehow a microaggression is something that we need to get so upset about. And I think at the end of this whole thing, we're going to find a lot more people, regardless of their background, learning, and regardless of their age, learning to be scrappy, to pick themselves up, to say, "Hey, guess what? It's a new day. I'm not going to wait around for somebody to pat me on the back, say, 'Oh, you'll be okay.' I'm going to get up. I'm going to choose a new life. I'm going to choose a new way of looking at things, and I'm going to choose the rightful energy and the rightful outlook to make my life into something that's meaningful." And only we can do that for ourselves.
I agree. I just don't have the patience for everyone else to get on board.
And those same people that don't want to get on board don't want to talk to you anyway, Rocky.
Oh, well, it's his life. I can't worry about it anymore.
Oh, boy.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Always checking with myself first before I react, respond, or make a decision.
What do you mean by checking with yourself first?
Most people, they'll react in the moment, or they'll do things maybe because of peer pressure, or what seems to be in right now, or what somebody's titillating you with. I will always just wait to see what's going on the inside. I'll tell you what I used to say to my daughter. "Haley, if you feel a smile on the inside of you, go with it. If you feel heaviness, say no." Does that make it a little bit more clear?
It does. You have that space before you react. Use it wisely. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
that it's okay to come out of hiding and be myself. Because I think I spent a lot of my early years trying very hard to please elders. Yeah. And to kind of like, I don't want to say I was not in the shadows. I was not that type, but it took me several years to speak my mind in ways of, let's say, my own empowerment. I'm very glad, and it only came through challenges. So even that was a good thing for me, Rocky.
It's funny because you and I are a little older. We have seen a dramatic shift in the world of how things have changed and how people's behaviors have changed and in regards to previous generations and the way things used to be done, what was acceptable, what's not acceptable, and so forth. And so it's been quite interesting. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Find out what you love and what you in particular are interested in, not what people tell you you're supposed to be interested in. Pursue it, apply your energy to it, and be the best at it that you can.
Do it on your own terms, right?
Yes.
So important. If people would like to learn more about you and what you do and how you serve, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, I would say since we're dealing with a listening audience, and I know you and I are both on iTunes as well as a number of other podcast platforms, look for Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out. And if they're looking for a speaker, they could find Maura Sweeney on Speaker Hub. And I'm also known as the Ambassador of Happiness, where I speak about leadership, influence, and the power of happiness.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll make sure we share all of that. I love Stoic philosophy and the lessons I've learned from it. One is that we can only control ourselves and our actions. We can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. And lastly, be careful who you give your time and attention to. They may not have your best interests at heart. I think we're going to see rapid change in the future with technology. If you haven't heard about ChatGPT, check it out. It's amazing what it can do and the answers it can give you, and it's 100 times better than Google for some information. From what I understand, kids are using it to write their essays for school, and it's actually doing a better job than they can. So are you ready for an ever-changing world? Are you ready to pivot? Have you built a reserve to allow yourself to handle a tough time? Many people can't, and they haven't, and they'll struggle when we're faced with change. Those that have will find a much, much easier way forward. Are there any lessons that you can take away from today? Hey, if you enjoy and get value from Richer Soul, I really appreciate it if you would support it by forwarding it to a friend or sharing it wherever you typically share what you like. I'll thank you in advance. Next week, we're going to talk about building regenerative wealth with Laura Oldane. I know you'll enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.